All right, man. Well, everyone, welcome back, and we are very luckily joined this morning once again by Mike Bohn. So, Mike, thank you for joining us today, man. Really appreciate it. So, look, getting straight into it, man. We've heard a lot of comparisons between this possible incident of illicit gambling with James Krause and betting controversies in other sports, which I do feel is a somewhat unfair comparison due to the fact that MMA is still so young and is only fairly recently licensed pretty much everywhere, and it still has a bit of that social stigma of being a bit of a taboo sport almost. Do you think, depending on the findings of the authorities, that we could start to see multiple high-level fighters and matches be affected by this heading into 2023, such as Brandon Moreno and Davidson Figueiredo? Because, Brandon Moreno was obviously a fighter recently affiliated with Krause and Glory MMA.
Right. I think it's all going to come down to personal choices. I agree, I guess. And it's going to depend on where the lines are drawn in the sand, right? Like if other things continue to come out, the big one, obviously, that's kind of being one of the highlights of this whole story is them saying anyone who trains with Krause or out of his gym can't compete in the UFC. And, God forbid, imagine if that happened at like an American Top Team or an AKA. Obviously, not saying that anyone at those gyms are involved in anything, but just using them as an example. But that could change the complexion of, the sport a lot, because you would have a lot of people having to disassociate or coaches who couldn't do things. So, we could sit here for hours, right, and talk about the potential strings of where this could go and the fallouts and stuff like that. I mean, it can be very, very detrimental to the sport. You hope right now that this is something that potentially happened, if the worst case scenario is happening here with James Krause and everything. Obviously we don't have all the evidence, but you would hope maybe that would be a massive wake up call to the sport, would have other people reassessing how they're doing it, if there's other things going on, with similar actions. So the potential repercussions here could be massive, but it's terms of the integrity of the sport, you would hope that maybe they caught it in a bottle before it was able to escape and spread everywhere, type of thing.
Yeah, Mike, I was watching the post-fight presser from last weekend's UFC 282, and I actually really loved the fact that you brought up the James Krause investigation to Dana. I know Dana didn't seem too thrilled with the question, but I really appreciated you asking anyway. I think it's an important matter, and I know you're talking about it on the spinning back click as well. It is the most compelling and obviously biggest cloud over the UFC at the moment. In your opinion, what is the best way the UFC can come back from a cloud like this? And what are your thoughts on the matter itself?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope that from the UFC side, I'm sure hope is, say, again, worst case scenario, that there was foul play involved here, that stemming from the Derek Manier fight, or maybe others, say there was awareness and inside knowledge was shared and stuff. The UFC can only hope, as Dana kind of alluded to, that the people involved are the people involved, right? It doesn't turn into something bigger. And because if it did come in, the UFC itself was involved in something like this, that is such a game changer, right? Then your promoter's license at risk, you can't put on events, and this whole thing, the legs kind of fall underneath it. That doesn't feel like where we're heading. This does feel like if, as I said, worst case, it would just be a couple people that would maybe be outlawed from the sport, or, there would be a lot of regulation, people under intense scrutiny, stuff like that. So I think that's kind of more so where we're headed, if it is headed to the worst scenario. I think the UFC itself will be fine to a degree, but again, we see all the stuff with what happened in Ontario and Alberta. Temporarily, Alberta's back, but them pulling back betting. The UFC has a 10-figure, 8-figure, 9-figure deal with DraftKings.
Yeah,
that goes away. The UFC, you can kind of see the timeline here of how things have happened. As soon as it started affecting potentially their bottom line, and that's these massive sponsorship deals associated with the brand, then that's when they're going to start, kicking rocks. And I did have the exchange with Dana, and I know, some people thought he was maybe getting agitated with me or whatever, but the way I look at it is, and I hope he would at least have the same too, I gave him an opportunity to be that passionate and to sit up there and say hey, you do this stuff, you're going to federal effing prison. And he's saying how the F would I know what's going on? They're not telling me. That's the right thing to say. Be hey, this is what's going on. I have nothing to do with this. We are we don't tolerate this. I gave him the platform to that passionate and show like this is how strongly I feel about it, and we have nothing to do with this. It's the individuals, a few bad seeds or whatever the case may be. So I was completely fine with how that interaction went. I didn't take any of that personally or think he was like coming at me. I think he was kind of speaking to everyone in the sport as a whole, right? And it was just kind of classic Dana in that sense. So man, like it's just so hard to unpack. There's a lot of layers to this, and we're just gonna have to see where it goes because it's obviously still potentially in its infancy. I mean, as Dana kind of said, I know as much as you do, and I can sit here and say to you guys, like I probably know similar to what you do. All the stuff that's out there is public, is pretty much what's known.
We'll have to see if you're going to federal prison becomes a classic Dana line. But look, man. So coming off UFC 282, Mike, it was somewhat obviously a anticlimactic card with, the controversy for the last sort of pay-per-view card for 2022. However, I think this weekend's fight night, is really a sleeper and has the potential to end the year with, some absolute bangers and kind of, wash out that taste of, the anticlimactic UFC 282. For me, the must-see fight on the card is Bobby Green and Drew Dober, but is there a particular fight or fighter that you're really looking forward to seeing this weekend?
Man, that's the one that really like jumps out to me. I mean, especially with Bobby Green this week, he's been, pretty sensational in the media. He said some very strong words. So yeah, like he's the one I really want to see. But like that co-main event is dope too between Arman Tsarukyan and Magulov. Like those are two guys that you look at it, you're like, oh, like I can barely pronounce these names or something. It's at the casual, but if you've seen them fight, Tsarukyan's obviously had the more higher profile fights as of now. But Ismagulov is very good. This is one that he kind of needs, I think, to be his breakout performance. Like all his UFC wins, I think, have been by decision so far. So like he needs something like a little highlight to just throw on his reel there. But he would go 6-0 in the UFC. He wins that. Like that's very hard to do at lightweight. This fight feels similar to Tsarukyan's last fight, where it's like, oh, the winner of this is going to be kind of hitting that next level, the one that he had against Gamrot. So there's so many good up and coming lightweights, and this is the hardest division to break through in, right? Like so hard to get a fight with one of those top 5 guys, a Poirier, a Conor, a Gaethje, something like that. We've seen how long it's taken like Fiziev to get there and do that, and he's just getting into potentially one of those fights. So these are one of those guys that you kind of have to look at and be like, hey, they're going to be something part of this division for a while. And then, speaking of lightweight, as you mentioned, Dober and Green they're two who are like established in that division for a long time, and that one just should be a banger.
Yeah, 100%. Mike, I'd like to mention one name, and that name is Douglas Crosby. Now, obviously, he's been in the media a lot this week, and rightfully so. After the stain that he put on last weekend's events, both Bellator, the Stotts and Sabatello, and obviously Pimblett, and Gordon. Do you have any updates on what will be happening with Douglas Crosby moving forward? And obviously we spoke about it a bit last time. We spoke about judging and everything, but after last weekend, do you think there is more of a concrete way around judging and ways to prevent guys like Douglas Crosby coming into the sport and putting on judging performances like that?
Yeah, it's just crazy, right? Because you say like coming into the sport, and it's like he's not really coming to the sport. He's been here, right, for a long time, and so a lot of these other judges, and that's I think the problem, right? Like we have all these people who have been around for so long, and how many bad scorecards. It's not just Douglas Crosby. There's a lot of them out there that are very suspect and have given controversial decision after controversial decision, and they never have to speak to us about it. They never have to give their piece. It's crazy, right? Like I cover the NBA as well. In Toronto for the Raptors, and it's like after the games, a pool reporter, which is like one person who represents the media as a whole, it's probably a different person each game depending on the city. They're taken to like the referee's locker room, and they get to ask 3 to 5 questions that are about this topic to a degree, or like say about a crazy call at the end of the game or something that was overseen, and they get answers directly from the refs, and they have at least some degree of accountability. You might not like it, might say I had the wrong angle or this thing or the other thing, but at least they'll speak on the record about it. We have none of that in MMA, right? Like we can't ever talk to these people. So like that's the biggest thing I'd like to see happen, because maybe he has a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe you sit down there and he's like, this is what I saw from my angle, and you're like, okay, like respect. I don't agree with it, but like at least I can understand where you're coming from. We don't know. We don't know what he's looking at, what they're doing. And when it comes to Douglas himself, I mean, it seems like maybe the walls are closing in on him a little bit, but like, I don't know. I mean, this thing you saw, I'm sure, the statement that Mike Mazzilli put out from the ABC and the Mohegan Commission, where he basically said he wants to have a review with the 3 judges, and that he called like Douglas's, I think the quote was like disturbing or something, or concerning, whatever it was, as far as his scorecard. So like, I mean, that's something, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's going to lead to. Again, maybe they sit down and Mike Mazzilli's like, okay, like, respect, I understand your perspective. You'll be back for the next Bellator. Or he'll say, hey, buddy, like, I think you really need to reconsider how you're doing this. We're not going to use you for 6 months or a year, or, you know, fingers crossed forever. But that's just one state, right? Like Douglas Crosby also judges in Texas and New Jersey and New York, Nevada. We haven't heard Nevada come out and say anything about they want to talk to him about the Paddy Pimblett scorecard. There's 2 other judges that also gave Paddy Pimblett a winning scorecard. So like, that's the problem too about not having like unified commissions, right? Like we don't have a single commission for the whole country. Each state is its own entity. So even if the Mohegan Commission was like, okay, we're done with you, we never want to use you again, there's still potentially 49 other states that he could go work in. So I don't really know like what it's going to put a stop to it, unless all of them come to a consensus being like, hey, don't use Douglas Crosby anymore. He'll probably continue to find work and continue to find work in high profile fights. So I don't really know what you do to rid him. I don't know what the commissions are saying to these guys behind the scenes. It's just a crazy situation, and it doesn't really seem like there's a snap your fingers solution. The best one is just stop using these bad judges. Like it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. And the situation, you know, will definitely be good to sort of, you know, keep an eye on to sort of see what happens, you know, now with keeping judges accountable. And I will say it did, the situation with Douglas Crosby did lead to my favorite comment on MMA YouTube for 2022, which was, with Douglas Crosby as a judge, Jared Gordon really had to get the KO and submission for the split decision victory over Paddy. But look, man, so Mike, you know, we always sort of focus on how the sport is constantly, you know, growing and getting better, whether that's in regards to production, marketing, you know, the fighters themselves. But, you know, and we just kind of touched on it with judging, but are there any other problems, you know, whether they are large or small, that you think are actually getting worse in the sport that, you know, deserves a bit of attention?
Oh, man, that's tough. I think we're in like a fairly, you know, I think outside of that stuff, I mean, like this is as bad as it gets, right? When it comes to decision, like bad judging, potential gambling, fight fixing. Like I can't really think of stuff much worse. I mean, like we're not going to be ignorant here and just be like, hey, just because you saw us around in the UFC, every athlete is going in there completely clean. You'd be foolish to think that. There's always going to be people skirting the system, but at least there is something in place that's trying to like weave this out and trying to make things better in that regard. So like, I don't feel as strongly about like the, you know, PED stuff. Obviously there's stances that can be taken, but at least there's like some sort of safeguards in place when it comes to that. But I can't really think of issues much worse than like, especially when it comes to the judging and fighters who deserve to be winning fights, deserve to get their full payday, are being hit in the pocket there. I mean, you can mention pay. Obviously fighter pay is like a significant one. We all want to see that improve, but I would give my same opinion on that as I do on every other time I talked about this. I mean, I've been sitting here in this chair, one like it, for like 10 years now, getting asked questions about fighter pay. How does it change? What do we do? And there's a lot of things, but at the end of the day, the only thing that's really going to change it is if the fighters collectively come together and take their piece of the pie and just not sit there and hope it's going to be given to them. So like, I can only beat that drum so hard until they make that move themselves. I can't create the fighters union. You know? Jake Paul's trying, but God, who knows what his are, what's going to happen there, right? But like, at least he's putting something out there. Everyone else is, you know, pretty much mum when it comes to that stuff. So, like, I mean, fighter pay is and will always be the biggest issue for me. But like, they don't seem too bothered by it. So
I know.
Try for them all day.
Yeah, Mike. Look, 2022 saw a lot of fighters break out and put on, you know, fantastic performances. Guys like, you know, Jack Della Maddalena, Shavkat Rakhmonov, especially Ilya Topuria was a big one as well. Heading into 2023, who at the moment do you believe could have a breakout year?
Breakout year. I mean, do you mean like a guy who's like not yet a contender or like ranked and stuff?
Maybe
like
not. Yeah, not yet a contender. Yeah.
Oh man, there's so many of them. I mean, Topuria is one that he was so damn impressive. Like his unbelievable. I'd have to look like through the rankings. There's just so many fighters now, man. It's like so hard to keep track of. But like, yeah, I think Rachmanov's, he's one that stands out to me too. He fights on the first card of the year. So he's a guy that like, hey, like if he gets 3 fights in and they're on that level, like he's a champion or fighting for a belt by the end of that next year too. You know, Hamzat, I know he's like already in that star sphere, but we haven't got to see nearly enough action out of him over the past couple of years, right? Like he was the guy that, we're going to see him fight every second weekend or something. He's going to be the new cowboy. And we've got one fight out of him in like
this year,
and a half. So like, it's tough. I mean, he seems poised for it. There's just so many though. Like it's the sport's so deep with talent right now, and I think some of the ones that maybe we don't even think of right now. End of next year, we'll be talking about like, whoa, didn't see that coming.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So, Mike, focusing on Darren Till, he's in a bit of a tough spot, obviously, and I've seen opinions seem a little bit split on this. There are calls for retirement, and then there are some like Bisbing and others saying he can still be a champion. He just maybe needs to go fight somewhere else. He maybe needs to really lower the level of competition, but it is a tough spot for him. So, what are your thoughts on his career moving forward?
Yeah, like I would love nothing more than like, okay, give Darren Till the 40th ranked middleweight or like someone even lower. Like it was already, respect to Dricus du Plessis, but like he initially when they booked that fight, that's kind of what you thought it was, right? Like he's a step down, like Whitaker and stuff. He's obviously good. He's got some good wins here, but like he's not as proven. So you're like, okay, like maybe this is the step back Darren needed. Turns out he needed an even bigger one. But it's like, how low do you go? And how low is the UFC willing to go? The problem is with Darren, like I'm sure he makes a pretty good purse.
Yeah.
And they're not in the business of just giving guys layups when they're paying them that type of money.
Yeah.
That's the problem when it comes to stuff like this. I wish, because I think it would be in the best interest. It's like, okay, well, like give Darren a fight he's almost guaranteed to win, let him get back on track, and then you maybe get 3 more fights out of him and it makes the money you're paying more worth it. So you can put him back in that like headlining position or whatever. But just historically, the UFC doesn't really seem to be in that type of way of matchmaking. So it's kind of a pickle, right? Like, what do you do? It's just, he's in a really tough spot. Like people mentioned, should he go back to welterweight? I don't hate that, but like I saw him, man, when he was doing those cuts and it was nasty for him. And then he seems like too small for middleweight. So it's like, that's where you wish we had a 175 division for him. But again, that's not what it is. So it's not a realistic solution either, unless he wants to go to Eagle FC or whatever they do.
Yeah.
I don't think the UFC also is in the business of being like, hey, big notable name Darren Till, multiple fights on your contract, like go have fun somewhere else, bro.
Yeah.
Like it almost feels like he's stuck at this point. I don't know. We haven't gotten clarity on whether his knee was completely blown out or if he's going to need surgery or whatever. If that's the case, then who knows? Like you take a year and reset and come back and maybe you look at like that top 15, top 20 and there's a fight you really like and you call for that one. But right now, like, yeah, he just needs to, I guess, get healthy, do some soul searching and figure out what he wants to do moving forward. Because this is like that spot where it gets real tough for these guys. I think he's immensely talented, but it hasn't translated in the past few fights, and it's tough for those guys who start young and peak. In hindsight, it feels like him fighting Woodley for the belt when he did. It was like the worst thing that could have ever happened to him.
Yep. Mark, look, man, last question from us because we don't want to keep you too long. You've had a big day with Wayne, so we very much appreciate your time.
As long as you do me.
Thank you. As a man who is basically in attendance for every UFC event covering the sport, I wanted to get your sort of highlight package, and what for you has been your highlight for this year covering the sport, and will you be heading down our way next year for 284 in Perth?
To answer your second question first, I think so. It's looking good at the moment. I'm very excited. Australia has been on my bucket list for a long time, and it's like one of the few places the UFC, frequented pre-COVID that I didn't ever get a chance to go to. So I mean, to go back and have that champion versus champion fight, like I'm freaking jazzed for that. So the 30-hour flight will be worth it. Let's hope. But to go back, highlights. The event that stands out to me that I just maybe enjoyed the most was Singapore, UFC 275. I mean, we had the fight of the year, right? Like to be cage side for what Glover and Yuri did that night was just crazy. Obviously, Zhang Wali knocks out Joanna with the spinning back fist.
Yeah.
That was just a great card from top to bottom, and just like going to Singapore and getting to experience that, and then the travel over there, the city, that one that just like really stands near and near to me. But there were some great cards, man. I mean, Tony Ferguson getting knocked out by Michael Chandler, being cage side for that one was just like,
wow,
like holy F moment. Yeah, there was some big ones. Poirier versus Chandler was cool in New York. So like a lot of the ones, I mean, we've had some great pay-per-views this year. I think the like event of the year debate is going to be a good one we get soon. To me, it's between probably New York and Singapore in terms of like the best ones. But yeah, and I had the privilege of being at both of those, so it's tough to like pick the moments. But yeah, Singapore really stands out to me just because like the city, somewhere you've never been, such a great fight card, and it delivered. And that fight was just so good. And it's disappointing we didn't get to see it again last weekend.
Yeah, 100%. Look, like I said, man, we always very much appreciate your time. It's a really an honor to always get to chat with you. And look, we hope you enjoy your holiday season. Have a Merry Christmas. And when you come down under, we'd love to chat to you again. But all the best, man, and have a safe and happy holiday season.
Thank you, guys. You too. Yeah, let's try to make this happen in person. That'd be great. I hope to meet you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks
Appreciate
very
it.
much, man.